Good morning. Good morning. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Angie Jones. I'm the head of developer relations for TBD, which is Block's newest business unit focused on decentralized technologies. Today, I want to talk about the web. All right. So the web was invented, it was meant to be decentralized, right? The ethos was anyone can publish any information to anyone in the world without the approval of any central entity. The web totally revolutionized the way that we interact. However, it's missing a key element. Y'all gonna have to fix me now. I'll be like, boom, boom, boom. Y'all got me? All right. So we're missing a key element, the identity layer. So applications that require user accounts, they have to collect our data in order to persist it with our content. Major powerhouses such as Facebook and Google, they've tried to help alleviate a lot of this by enabling us to authenticate to these services via their APIs. And while that has been super convenient, we have very little agency over our information. What if we could own and control both our identity and our data across the web? This is possible with a decentralized web platform. This platform embraces the convenience of the user account model that we know in Web 2, but it also restores control back to the users, an ethos of Web 3. The harmony of these two views is what we're calling Web 5. What we're calling Web 5. Now, I promise you, whatever little joke just popped in your head, I've already heard it. So do not stop me in the hall and ask me what happened to Web 4, all right? So Web 5, it enables developers to build decentralized web apps on top of it while it abstracts away a lot of the complexity of doing so. There are three pillars to Web 5. All are based on open web standards. There's decentralized identifiers, verifiable credentials, and decentralized web nodes. And I'll walk you through each one of these. So decentralized identifiers. The identifiers that we know and use today, they're controlled by some intermediary, whether that be the government or a company or organization. For example, my email address is an identifier that's associated with me. I use it all over the web to authenticate and identify myself. However, I don't own it. Google does. My Twitter handle, TechGirl1908, near and dear to my heart. This is an identifier that's associated with me, but y'all, I can't keep up with who owns Twitter these days, right? So before we can realize truly decentralized applications, we first need decentralized identifiers that we own and control, and this will eliminate our dependency on applications to authenticate us. Decentralized identifiers are a W3C standard, and they're simply a long string of text that's comprised of three parts. We have the scheme, which is DID. We have the did method, which ultimately resolves to some sort of CRUD operation, so create, read, update, or delete. And then we have a GUID that identifies a did subject. Did subject means the person, the place, or the thing that is being identified. So these identifiers are not limited just to people. Decentralized identifiers are the only part of Web 5 that's stored on the blockchain. And it's simply this string, not anyone's actual information, because we happen to think that's pretty wild to put people's personal information on a blockchain. They follow this standard format, and because of that, they're chain agnostic. So they can be used on any of the blockchains or no blockchain at all. Here are 3 examples. The first one is a decentralized identifier that's anchored on Bitcoin. The second one is on Ethereum. And the final one is anchored on the web. It's not using blockchain. So because your identifier is anchored on-chain, but your information is off-chain, the DID works as a URI that points to a DID document, which holds that information. Okay? The DID document is typically stored on a decentralized storage system such as IPFS. So you can think of this as like a key-value pair where the DID is the key, the document is the value. The document is a JSON file, and it contains information on how to interact with a DID subject. So it'll have things like the DID subject's public keys, as well as authentication and verification methods. All right? So that covers decentralized identifiers. The next component of Web 5 is verifiable credentials. Verifiable credentials are also a W3C standard. They work hand in hand with decentralized identifiers to enable trustless interactions, meaning 2 parties don't need to know or trust one another in order to engage. But claims that are made about a DID subject can be cryptographically verified. Let me show you an example. So let's say that Alice wants to apply for a loan and the lender needs to verify her employment. So her employer, Acme, can issue a cryptographically signed, verifiable credential, which would then be stored in Alice's wallet. Okay? I want to double click inside that credential. I want you to see what's in here. So we have the issuer as Acme. We have the subject as Alice. More specifically, we have the decentralized identifiers for both Acme and Alice. And then we have the claims that the issuer is making about the subject. So Acme is saying, yes, this person's full name is Alice Smith. Her salary is $120,000. And then they've cryptographically signed this credential. All right? That's all the information that's needed, so that's all that's provided. Once the lender requests that proof of employment, Alice can then present her credential to the lender. Now remember, the lender doesn't know or trust Alice. However, they do consider Acme a trustworthy entity, and therefore, trust is extended to Alice in this case. So this is a nice, easy, machine-readable way to verify claims across the web. The last pillar of Web 5 is the centralized web nodes. So today, centralized entities act as our data stores. Our applications, they hold our content, they hold our preferences, and we have very little control. Now, decentralized web nodes changes this. It enables us to decouple our data from the apps that we use. Blue Sky is a great example of this. So Blue Sky is a decentralized version of Twitter, but instead of them holding your connections and your tweets, that stuff is stored with you. What this means is now your data is portable. You can bring it with you wherever you're going, right? So if you wanted to sign up for decentralized Instagram or decentralized TikTok, I see a lot of y'all migrating to Mastodon. You can take this with you. What if you didn't have to start over? What if you aren't saying, oh, where are all my friends? Here's my handle. Y'all follow me over here. But you could plug it right in, and all of your people are right there, your content as well. Decentralized web nodes are capable of holding both public as well as encrypted data. All right? So in the case of Blue Sky, things like your tweets, your connections, you would want this to be public. Things like your DMs, you would want to be encrypted. Decentralized web nodes also do not live on the blockchain because no one wants their tweets and their DMs on a public immutable ledger. All right? So instead, you host it locally, and you can replicate it to multiple devices and cloud instances, right? Now, this is definitely a paradigm shift, but it's not a total overhaul of the web that we already know. You can think of it like a progressive web app, but decentralized web apps would add a decentralized web node SDK to the tech stack. In that way, applications are free to truly go serverless because they no longer need to store your information on their end. Now, the decentralized web nodes are associated with your decentralized identifiers, and that is listed in that DID document that I talked about. So here's a section here that lists service endpoints, and these are URIs to Alice's web node. Given an application has the URI to a web node, they can send the request for data. So in this request, they're sending this HTTP request, and they're requesting all of the objects that follow the social media posting schema. So the objects inside of the web node are JSON objects that follow some semantic type. And this is how we make sure that the data is interoperable between multiple applications, right? So if they ask Alice for all of her objects that follow the social media posting schema, the ones that are public will be automatically returned. The ones that are encrypted, Alice would have to give explicit access to those if she chooses. All right, so all of this is very complicated, especially for non-technical users. As I often remind builders in the space, your average user is not requesting decentralization as a feature, right? So we need an easy way to manage all of this while making decentralization and implementation detailed. So we're building an identity wallet. And with this wallet, you'll be able to manage things like your decentralized identifiers in the context in which they're used, your verifiable credentials, and your content within your web nodes, as well as your authorizations and verification. Now, Web 5 enables developers to build decentralized web apps on top of it. The individual components of Web 5, again, are all open standards, so they don't belong to any one company. What my team TBD is doing is implementing these open standards, aggregating them together to make the Web 5 platform. It's open source, so you're free to use this as your foundational layer and focus your attention on what you care about, which is your app. Speaking of apps, the sky is the limit to what types of apps can be built on this foundation, but I've included a couple of examples just to give you some ideas. So let's say that Alice is a Spotify user, and she's given Spotify write access to her web nodes. So again, this is decentralized Spotify. They've gone serverless. So they're writing everything that she's doing to her web node. So when she makes a new playlist, when she faves a song, maybe some of her preferences with the app are being written to her web node. And then let's say Alice wants to try Tidal out. She's heard some good things about them. They pay their artists more. She wants to check them out. She can do so very easily by just giving Tidal read access to her web node, and they can read everything that has been placed there from Spotify. Notice there we're using a music playlist schema, so they can easily pull those objects. And now Alice is able to use Tidal right out of the box. Managing the medical records is a scenario that's near and dear to me. Within the last 5 years, I have moved 3 different states, meaning I need to get new doctors and things like that. That is a pain to do, right? So with this technology, Alice can hold all of her medical records herself. As she's going to her primary care provider, her dentist, her gynecologist, and all of these various specialists, she doesn't have to try to call all of the old ones and have them fax over data to the new ones, all out of her control, right? Instead, this stuff can be hosted in her web nodes, and she can grant access or reject access to any of the doctors that she chooses to. All right? So those are just a couple of examples of what's possible with Web 5. The sky is the limit. once we have the web decentralized the way it was always intended to be. All right. If you want to know more information about Web 5, check us out at tbd.website. Here's a QR code for that. We have our Discord. You want to chat about it. You have questions, ideas. We would love to hear them. You want to contribute or check out the code base. We are on GitHub. Also, if you want to work on decentralized technologies more formally, we do have some job postings listed there as well. If you're a company, you're trying to solve some of these same challenges, or you want to collaborate, we're down for that as well. Thank you all so much. The future is TBD.
Friends, thank you very much, Angie, and thank you, Todd. So let's go ahead and bring my slides up here. And right off the bat, I'm already feeling like I've made a mistake font-wise. I thought Angie's fonts were pretty cool, so I'm going to fix that right off the bat because that's very unprofessional. And I'm already feeling like maybe black on white is a mistake, so let's go ahead and bring in some evocative stock photography. That is not representative of a developer's desk, so let's put an actual developer's desk there. That is probably more representative of the kind of space that I occupy. So to piggyback on what Angie said and what Todd said, it's all about humans, right? All of these things that we're building, all this software that we're making, why are we doing it? We're making it so humans feel welcome and so humans feel good about what they're doing. So I hope that you all feel welcome here and that you feel welcome in tech. And feeling welcome in tech is what my talk is about. I'm going to talk a little bit about attitude and style and how we interact with folks online and how new or early in career people feel welcome in tech. Now, I have a tendency to think about early in career people as being younger, but I'm going to refer to them as being early in career because they might be career switchers. They might be my age and they're just getting started. But we see a lot of people in tech talk about inclusion and diversity, and I am saddened that we don't see more things like what I saw when I was coming up. This is a magazine from 1984, and a young lady here programming on a TI 99. That was in March of 1984. It seems that you should be seeing things like that when you go to the store and have a computer magazine like that. I hope that tech welcomes you. One of the things that we want to avoid in tech is this idea of the technology priesthood. Priests, hundreds or even thousands of years ago, they had the book, right? And you couldn't read, and you wanted to get the information from the book, they would tell it to you, and they would have this book, and they'd say, have you heard the news? And then you would want to say, well, that's great, let me see that. And they would say, don't touch it, you can look, can't touch. And there was this relationship between the technology priesthood and the people who want to interact with it. It's unfortunate now that even when we go, coming up soon to Thanksgiving, and you introduce yourself to your families and your cousins that you only see at Thanksgiving, and they go, oh, Scott's a techie. I'm not a techie. I broke my computer. I don't know what I did to it. It was my fault. We've built into technology this relationship that they broke it, and it was their fault. How did we get UX so wrong that I'm doing tech support for my parents every Thanksgiving and making them feel bad because they did it wrong? In fact, we built it wrong. We don't want to be hoarding knowledge and hoarding power. We want everyone to feel welcome, and we don't want to be putting people down in this space. We don't want to be gatekeeping. We don't want to keep the gate closed for anyone who wants to get into technology. So one of the things that I try to encourage, and I want to encourage here, is that if you have information, I hope you're putting it out there. I hope that you are part of all things open, whether it be source code or stories that you can tell or blog posts that you've been thinking about writing. I don't want you to waste your keystrokes. I talk a lot about this idea of wasting one's keystrokes and putting that energy out there, being really deliberate and intentional about what you're doing with your time and being present. This has been a big part of my journey during COVID and also the last 10 or 15 years, kind of waking up to being present and thinking about what I'm doing in tech and realizing that even though I've got 30 years in technology, I was kind of just hanging out for 7 or 8 of those. And really understanding that about myself and recognizing that I wasn't really present and learning and being open to new people and new situations for that entire 30-year people made me realize that it's not nice or cool to oh, I've got 30 years in the biz. Well, 23 if you don't count those 7 when I was basically asleep at the wheel. A lot of people are concerned that they're not an expert enough to share their information. Maybe I shouldn't have a TikTok or a Twitter or a blog. What could I talk about? I'm not an expert. Everyone is an expert at something, and they are all experts in their own journey. So we want to encourage more early in career people to tell us about their journey and how they got involved in tech. So many people will say, well, I don't want to do JavaScript class. Kent's already done the definitive JavaScript class. But I haven't heard yours and how you learned JavaScript and what worked for you in your journey. We want to encourage folks to share their stories because everyone is an expert. Now, I mentioned conserving your keystrokes. Let's say afterwards one of you who I haven't met maybe says, hey, great talk, Scott. I have a question. I don't know you. I'm not going to give you the gift of 3,500 of my keystrokes. You may ask me a great question. I go, man, that was a great question. I've never heard that question before. But I have a finite number of keystrokes left in my hands before I die. How do you balance that? What if you email me and you go, hey, here's a question. I go, oh, that's a great question. What a gift. And then I type out 3,500 keystrokes, 9 paragraphs, and I send it off to this new person, this new friend that I've never met before, and they say, thanks. Those keystrokes are gone. But the question was a gift. So now I'm torn. Do I charge him money? Do I send him a PayPal? Maybe distributed PayPal? I don't know how it works. What I should do is I should put those keystrokes anywhere with a URL and then email the URL and then go to sleep. And then wake up with 10 people have read that blog post or 20 people have seen that tweet. And now that energy that I put there in the universe has expanded. People will say, well, I want to start a blog. I don't want to do a Twitter. No one's going to read it. You only need 2 people to read it, and one of them should not be you. And then you've doubled your power. And you have now limitless keystrokes. That's what I've been trying to do for the last several decades, because those keystrokes are working for me as I sleep. And I want to encourage you to start putting your keystrokes anywhere with a URL. OneDrive, SharePoint, Wikipedia, I don't care. Anywhere where I can have a URL. Never, anywhere but email would be a great place, because email is where keystrokes go to die. I also want to remind people that we're all amateurs. This marks 30 years and 1 month in tech. Everything that I learned in school, every language, every operating system is all dead, except for C. C will never die. But everything I learned in school, I don't use anymore. So I am proudly an amateur. Being beginner is a skill, as we heard from our friends earlier. There are no professionals. So in resetting my understanding about where I sit in my experience and the place of privilege that I have being in tech for such a long period of time has kind of reset how I think about being a professional in tech and how I change this relationship with experience. Oftentimes we'll hear people say, oh yeah, you got 20 years experience, do you? Or do you have the same year 20 times? When I said before that of those 30 years I was kind of asleep, yeah, I was just kind of doing my job, but I wasn't really learning. I wasn't doing any ongoing training. So I'm realistic about my job and the time that I spent. And in the last several years, I've learned so much more by trying to be more present and more inclusive in my thinking. Now, I recently, with my family during the pandemic in the last 4 or 5 years, we got our black belts. So if you need a slap fight any small children or anyone who's old and frail, I could probably knock them over. But when I got that, this is what's called a first dan black belt in Taekwondo. The gentleman who had taught us is a 9th dan, and he had been doing it since the 60s. He wanted to remind us not to get a little bit lazy. And he said, that's great, congratulations. Now the work starts. Now the work starts. We busted our asses for half a decade. And he's like, all right, now we're ready to do the actual work. Congratulations. Welcome to school. That was a very interesting way to phrase it, and it really changed things for us. We look at our friend Tim Berners-Lee, who invented the World Wide Web. Try to remind this to the young people, to the early in career people. Everybody wants to be a senior engineer in 3 years. Did he say senior web developer? Did he say the? That would have been a flex. What do you do if you show up with a business card that says, web, the? What do you mean by that? Oh, yeah, I made it. That was me. He didn't even put Sir. He could have said, Sir Tim Berners-Lee, the web developer, but he didn't. And that's the kind of humility that I think we all want to bring into this space. We want to bring that into the space when we're thinking about mentorship, because you're never too old to get good advice. I thought at this point in my career, as I'm starting to think about retirement, that I would want to spend more time mentoring people. And I start realizing that most folks, most underrepresented, or an even better word would be underestimated people, are over-mentored. I was doing mentorship, but what I was really doing was a weekly lecture from an old person. Well, son, let me tell you about the 6502 processor. They didn't need to hear that. I needed to spend less time mentoring and more time sponsoring. Now, sponsorship is something that's worth pointing out, is what creates luck. Sponsorship actually invents luck. You hear about people saying, oh, you're lucky. Oh, my goodness, you're lucky. That's amazing. Well, luck is being prepared plus opportunity. There's so many people who are prepared but haven't got those opportunities. And I'm trying to not just help prepare the next generation, but also give them space to succeed. And I'm realizing that we do that with privilege. Now, privilege is a word that some people are triggered by, but I've started realizing that I'm on United Airlines, and I have platinum status, which means I can get into the club. So I have that privilege. I have club privileges. But here's a funny thing that I learned about the club at the United Lounge. I can bring a friend. And then I can leave the club. So I'm smuggling people into the club. Is this your friend? It's my cousin. Random people. I'm picking random people. Hey, want to go to the club? Let's go. Yeah. And we go to the club, and then I just leave the club. I'm actually literally putting them into spaces that they would not have access to. And here's the part that's great. I don't have like 2 club passes. I have unlimited club passes. I have unlimited privilege. That's super cool. And one of the things that I'm realizing at work is that I have level privilege. You're a senior engineer, a staff engineer, a principal engineer. You have unlimited level privilege to bring junior engineers along. Hey, we're going to do an engineering area review. You want to come? Be prepared. We've just invented luck, created luck out of thin air. And I can do that an unlimited number of times. So now I'm starting to think about the difference between mentorship, which is getting together and advising people, suggesting directions for them to go, and sponsoring people, which is becoming a spotlight and shining a light on them and lifting them into new spaces, and thereby creating entirely new opportunities that they would not have had, as well as acknowledging the previous opportunities that I had been given and the luck that had been created for me when I thought that that luck came entirely from within. In fact, people were silently lifting me up without asking for anything in return. We want to avoid being transactional networkers. If you're keeping score, you're doing sponsorship wrong. The sponsorship spectrum includes everything from a mentor to a strategizer to an opportunity giver to an advocate. People who know me will know that I collect cool people like Pokemon, and I trade them with my friends. You know it's true. And that is something that gives me a lot of energy and really feeds my spirit. So I try to be a connector as much as I can. Having a little trouble with our clicker here. There we go. Mentorship is a two-way street. It's not a scheduled regular lecture. You don't have to necessarily do it forever. So I've found when starting a new mentorship or sponsorship relationship, time boxing it. Why are we doing this? Why are we entering into this relationship? Well, we're trying to get me more money. Well, we're trying to get me an opportunity. Well, we're trying to get me promoted. And then you can say, okay, good, that was season 1. You want to renew this for another season? That makes it a lot less awkward to acknowledge that it's not forever. And then another thing I want to point out is that I have started to collect stories because I like to hear other people's stories, and I want to hear the stories of the folks that I'm bringing into tech. So what I want you to do is to have some homework. Think about the stories about how you got into tech, or a story about something that you did that made you really happy or really proud, and then tell it and then see if there's a lesson in there. Create fables, technology fables of your own that you can share with your early in career folks. I'll tell a real quick one. I'm going to actually click really fast because I'm running out of time. Blah, 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 blah. Click art, clip out, picture of a toaster. Picture of a toaster. We're going to skip that. Don't worry about that. Don't worry about that. Okay, here's the story. Because I got a timer. This gentleman right here is a character actor named Chris Connor. He's incredibly talented. He was on a show called Altered Carbon where he played an AI. And if you watch Altered Carbon on Netflix, you'll realize that he was carrying that show. He was chewing up the scenery. And I really like Twitter for talking to character actors. Because you tweet Tom Cruise, he's not going to talk to you. But you tweet a character actor, and they're going to be like, oh, thanks for watching my show. So it turns out he lives in Portland, and I tweeted him, and I said, we should have tacos. And we totally did. We totally got to hang out. And he and I went and hung out, and this is him wearing an ascot, which just is such a flex. And we recorded an episode of my podcast, and it was amazing. And then I went back home, and I was like, I have this burgeoning bromance with this guy. We're going to be friends, you know. It's going to be amazing. So I go and I plug in the SD card, and I put it into my Windows machine, and this is what I see. See an infinitely recursing empty list of folders here. But the disk says that there's data there. It says that there's 320 megs there, but the file system is lying to me. And that made me very uncomfortable. So I don't know anything about these things, but I do know that there are layers and that the computer is lying to you. That's what layering really means, is lying. So I went off and I learned about FAT, the file allocation table, and I realized I had a corrupted file allocation table. So I built it from scratch because I didn't want to call this actor and tell him, can we do another recording of the show all over again? So I would have to literally move to another city. Because how am I going to tell him, hey, remember that awesome thing that we did? We're going to have to do it again. I found it, I brought it back, and now he and I actually hang out, and it's really awesome. So what is the tale that I didn't tell the early in career people? Nothing in the computer is hidden from you. You have the power to learn these things. You can dig deeper. I may be an application developer, but for 17 hours while I debugged this problem, I was a file system low-level engineer. So I want you to take some homework, figure out what your stories are and how can they be told in a way that encourages and lifts up your mentees, and do your stories humanize tech, and how can your friends and mentees share theirs. Thank you very much. I'm glad that you're here.
Thank you. Foremost expert, I'm already like, I wouldn't put myself anywhere close to that category, let's be fair. But open source security is something that gets a lot of attention. It's been getting attention as long as I can remember. I've been in this field 25 years, and I mean, I can think back to those early days when I was a developer, and we were talking about it then. Like, what do we do with this stuff? And you had the zealots who were like, open source is the most secure thing out there because everybody's looking at it, everybody's making sure it's secure. And on the other side, you've got, well, yeah, but we don't know who these developers are. We don't know what's going on with these maintainers. They might be doing work. They might just leave vulnerabilities in there forever. We don't know what they're doing. And it's all valid. But at the end of the day, it gets tiresome. And that's why this whole concept of open source fatigue is kind of a thing. So before I dive in, let me tell you a little bit about myself. That's me, if you can't tell. That's my airplane behind me. Why am I talking about airplanes? So I just bought this. It's a Cherokee 180, not important. But what is important is how much I'm learning about aviation. So I'm a student pilot. I've wanted to do this my entire life, and I'm now divorced. I am an empty nester. My last kid went off to college. It's wonderful, by the way, yes. Every bit as good as they tell you it is. See, you're with me. So I have money and time. I got a really good job. I could actually afford to go out and buy an airplane. So I've been learning a lot about, what goes into being a pilot and owning an airplane. And if you've never seen it, the FAA regulations for aviation are incredible. Okay, so there's a company that takes like a subset of them, and the regulations book that I have to study and know is this thick. That's not an exaggeration. Called the FAR AIM. If you go look it up, it's wild. But one of the things they do, because we all understand the need for safety in aviation, right? And we've all heard the stories. We've heard about plane crashes. We understand all those different things that have gone on. And so the FAA and the NTSB are always working together with their international partners trying to figure out how do we get safer. Now, this plane is from 1968. But even back in 1968, one of the things the FAA understood was the need for this information. This is the mandatory equipment list for my aircraft. This is everything that is installed in that aircraft beyond just the airframe. So you'll see electronics in there. I mean, if I had an autopilot, that would be listed. Now, why do they do this? They do this so that when there's a problem, you have something to track back to. They do this so that when you make a substantial change to your aircraft, it can be seen and documented, and you can start to figure out, okay, I'm going to replace this piece of avionics equipment with something else, and it's going to have this impact on my aircraft. So that's my little plane. Well, here we have the 737 MAX 8. Anybody remember that? Oh, yeah. This is where we now connect why I'm talking about aircraft to software development. Because you see that same standard equipment list, that exists for this plane too. That mandatory equipment list, or required equipment list, excuse me. The 737 MAX 8 is a perfect example of how things went wrong because Boeing, and I apologize to my friends from Boeing, you're not the only ones, Airbus is just in the same boat. And this is not judgmental, but this is the reality, okay? A decision was made to save costs on recertification, and so rather than have to go through the massive amounts of what we would call regression testing to get the FAA to certify a new aircraft, and then force everybody to be retrained on how to use that aircraft, they decided instead they would create a software fix. Is this starting to sound familiar? Does it sound like some of your jobs? And, the end result, the problem wasn't actually the software at all, right? The software did exactly what it's supposed to do. It was the fact that you had hardware that was failing and wasn't redundant, and so when that piece failed, well, the software kind of didn't know what the hell to do, so it basically pitched the plane up really high and down it came. Those are bad things. But this happens when we talk about open source. We have these bad things that pop up, and suddenly we have to react really, really fast. And we wish we had that list. We wish we had something we could go to. We wish we could figure out a better way. But it keeps coming up. And every time it comes up, it's like it was with the 737 MAX 8, where we shut everything down. Every 737 MAX 8 on the planet was grounded. This happens to us when open source has a vulnerability. Now, I can go back, Todd said a couple of years. This was, almost 6 years ago now, Equifax. There's a vulnerability in struts. Okay, well, that's really bad because lots of people at the time used struts. So everybody knew they had to go fix this. They ran out and they tried to fix it. But you know what? And we can argue about how it happened all day long. I'm not getting into that. Please, that's a whole other argument. Some people lost jobs over this. But somehow or another, there was that version of struts existed somewhere in the Equifax environment that they didn't know about. They weren't able to find it. Despite all their best efforts, they were breached. And we all know how that went. 164 million consumers worth of data. At the time, it was the biggest one. Now, then, other things happened. Yahoo, who we all forgot existed, somehow It exposed 3 billion people, so I mean, it continues to get worse. But then you guys remember this from last year, right? Ooh, getting down to Christmas and New Year's, and hey, fresh, we got a vulnerability called Log4Shell. We even came up with a cool MS Paint logo for it because that's what we in security do. I don't know. Don't ask me. To my fellow security people, I don't know what the heck we're doing. We are bizarre. But, you know, hey, there's a vulnerability. Oh, wait, nope, there's another one. Oh, wait, no, there's another one. So what did companies do? We ran out, we shut down all of our developers and got them all lined up. Hey, go find everywhere you got Log4j and we're going to fix it. We got to fix it right now because it's critical. Everybody's telling us how bad it is. Wow. Think of all the development that didn't happen in those weeks and months following the announcement of this. And how many developers are sitting there at their desks digging through old code trying to figure out, does Log4Shell even exist? Is it a reachable vuln? Do we even use Log4j at all? Who knows? I had people asking me, by the way, you know, is my C# app vulnerable? Let's talk about what Log4j is, okay? But that's the thing that happens. We get into this mode, we start panicking, we keep going, and then, you know what? We find out 91% of Java apps have this thing. Holy crap. 61% of those, and this is the kicker, 61% of those were in indirect dependencies. So it wasn't something where I could just go look at my manifest and say, oh yes, I have Log4j in there, I should probably look and see if it's vulnerable. Nope, it's not the vulnerable version, I'm good. By the way, this is so cool because this is one of those examples where not updating your code made you safer. If you don't have version 209 or better, hey, you're actually okay. Good job. Way to stay on that older stuff. But this, you know, so again, just think of how much of a pain in the butt that is. If you're not a Java developer, you didn't have to suffer through this, consider yourselves lucky. And then a little while later, we had Spring4Shell comes up. Oh, there's another couple vulnerabilities in Spring now. And of course, we got all really excited, and then we found out, yeah, that's like not even a tenth as bad as what was going on with Log4j. So we got everybody all spun up because Log4j was fresh in our minds. We knew we had to get it fixed right away. It's a critical vulnerability. They're telling us, oh, wait, let's start looking at those CVSS numbers. Yeah, they're really, okay. Maybe this isn't such a big deal. Oh, wow, that list of exploitation sure is a long process. But the coup de grace. Who timed this? I must know. Is there anybody here from the OpenSSL project today? Probably not, because y'all are about to dump another one on us. And that's not me picking on OpenSSL, just to be clear, all right? But I don't know how this happened, that the perfect timing, today, possibly right now, sometime before noon, we are gonna find out about another big, horrible vulnerability. This time it exists in one of our favorite packages, OpenSSL. And oh, by the way, OpenSSL isn't just Java. It isn't just any one particular ecosystem, so this could get really interesting. We don't know. So why does this keep happening? And why do we keep driving developers crazy? Well, to my security folks in the room, we suck at this idea we call DevSecOps. Andrew Schaefer, Patrick Dubois got together and they, years and years ago, and they came up with this whole concept that we today call DevOps. And security, we're kind of like, ooh, us too, we want to be in the room. But when we come to the table, what do we bring? We bring a bunch of tools that break the pipeline, that create quality gates, which if you're in CI/CD, the concept of a quality gate is trash. All right, I'm just going to be blunt. You can't have quality gates in a CI/CD pipeline. It doesn't work that way. But that's our approach. That's how we've always done it in security. Our tools are separate. They're written by security people, half of whom don't even understand developers. We need tooling. If we're going to bring tooling and automation, it's got to be a part of the pipeline, and it's got to be credible. We also, in security, have this problem of perfection. The quest for perfection. Oh, we got to fix that vulnerability. We got to get it out of every system on our entire ecosystem, all across the entire environment. You really? was exploiting it internally. Yeah, maybe we want to get it fixed there eventually because someone, if they were to breach us, could pivot, and that speaks to resiliency. But how do we just get a little bit better? Well, if I accelerate my CI/CD pipeline, if I have a strong CI/CD pipeline and I'm doing my releases multiple times a week, multiple times a day, multiple times an hour, imagine how fast I can fix vulnerabilities when they need to be fixed. So if we don't stand in the way of the pipeline and instead help accelerate it, that's better for security. That's a concept that many of my peers and my colleagues in the security space, we just don't get. It's scary. Wait, you mean they're intentionally going to release with a known vulnerability in their code? Yes, because they can come back and they can fix it 2 releases later because they put it on the backlog as a P1. And that's the focus. We need to be focused on resiliency and how do we limit the attack damage, if you will. Not trying to eradicate every vulnerability from our environment. We need to be realistic. And so when it comes to these scary incidents where the walls are falling down all around us, we need to be smarter about how we address that, because I'm telling you, this crazy spin up a bunch of scary stories every time we've got vulnerabilities, yes, they're bad, but all we're doing is beating our poor engineering teams to a pulp. Stop, slow down, take a process and understand what is going on. How many of you, when these came up, heard about it's all hands on deck? Got to have everybody there. We're going to have this big scary. My CIO just said it yesterday about this OpenSSL thing, and I wanted to scream at him. No, it's not. We are not stopping development. We are not slowing down. We're going to keep people working. What are we going to do? We're going to start off by prioritizing. When these details of OpenSSL come out today, we're going to figure out what's the most immediate attack surface. It's probably going to be internet facing. It's pretty obvious. We're going to classify that prioritization. What is the highest risk part of our environment that we need to focus on first? And we're going to look at what's most likely to be exploited out of those. And then we're also going to look at, well, do we have certain environments that can be remediated easily? Let's nail those quick, right? If I can get ahead of those spaces first, I'm already making myself more secure and I'm protecting myself. Now, then we need to mitigate. Now, mitigate is not fixing. Mitigating is, you know what? There's a bunch of security vendors today who have advanced notice what this vulnerability is. People like Cloudflare and so forth, who I can work with them. They can give me some mitigations. We can start to protect that front surface fast. I can fire up my web application firewalls maybe. We'll see what the vulnerability is. I can isolate where it's possible, make sure I'm logging, and just work my way through those risk prioritized categorizations. And then finally, I can start working on remediation, which is, all right, let's look at what the threat vectors are to these apps. Is that vulnerability even reachable? Does it have to be fixed here? And let's start fixing it. But let's put it in the backlog. Let's make it business as usual for how we address this. Sure, it's P1, whatever, however you handle your top priority items, do that. Track it, do all the things. But stop shutting things down. So this is the abbreviated version. I am actually going to get more into these details later today, so if you want to join me 301 later on, great. But for now, I'll leave you the words of Winston Churchill. Perfection is the enemy of progress. And for us in security, we do way too much of that. So, quickly, invite you all to continue the conversation. My details are here. But thank you so much to all of you. Thank you to ATO for having me. It's been a pleasure, and we'll see you guys later on.
Okay, so excited to be here. My name is Kent C. Dodds, and I have a lot to cover, so we're going to be pretty fast. But before we do that, I want to just really quickly talk about the thing that I'm working on full-time. It's epicweb.dev. Go take a look at it later. I'm not going to talk about it too much here. One thing that I want to do is wake you up. I don't want you to stand up or anything because we don't have time for that, but I do want you to stretch as high as you can and over one side and over to the other. All right, thank you. Yeah, your brain needs blood flow. It's just science, so we're going to take advantage of that. This talk is going to be a bit of a journey through web development. It's also going to be forward-looking and also a bit of game. I want you to raise your hand if you've been in this industry for over 10 years. Holy smokes. Yeah, All Things Open brings a lot of you OGs into the forefront. It's awesome. So this will be a bit of a walk down memory lane for some of you, and maybe a little history lesson for others, and a bit of a game. And it's also not comprehensive. So those of you who've been doing this for a while, there's plenty of hand waving going on here. We don't have a lot of time to really get into the details. But if you do want to get into the details a little bit more, I have written about this on epicweb.dev, the web's next transition, so you can take a look at it there. Okay, let's get started. So the web standards were standardized back over 25 years ago. So the web's been around for a while. Interestingly, not all of the web XHRs were standardized in 2016, which is hilarious to me because we were using it for over a decade before that. Yeah, there's something that says about our industry, at least for the front end. So since the very beginning, we've been able to build web applications because we've had links to be able to navigate between pages and forms to be able to submit data from the user back to the backend. So we've been able to build web apps for a long time. And there are various web architectures that we've kind of evolved into. So we started out with multi-page apps. We didn't call it that. That was just like building web apps, but MPAs. And then I made this thing up, PEMPAs, Progressively Enhanced Multi-Page Apps, so progressive enhancement, we'll talk about that a little bit. And right now, I would submit that the vast majority of web developers are working on SPAs, single-page apps. So that's kind of where we're at right now. I think that we're geared for a new transition. We're transitioning to something new, and I'm excited to tell you about it today. The game we're going to play is called Follow the Code. So we have different areas of code that we write for different use cases. Persistence, that'd be like your ORM or your hand-rolled ORM. Routing for taking a URL and finding the right code to call for that URL. The data fetching and data mutation for interacting with the ORM, and rendering logic for what HTML to generate based on the current state of the data. And then UI feedback to tell the user, hey, yeah, I recognize that you submitted this form. Networks are a thing, and so we have a pending state here somewhere. So let's start with MPAs. This is the basic architecture there. We have persistence, like everything is on the server. There were some people who were doing a little bit of JavaScript on the client, but for the most part, the application itself completely lived on the server. Architecturally, what this meant was when your user is requesting your document to load the page in the first place, the user enters the URL, and the browser is responsible for the UI feedback. So you don't write that code. The browser spins the favicon or whatever it does. And the routing on the back end will find the right data and then send that off to the rendering, and that will be sent to the client to render that HTML. And then when the user submits a form, we're going to do something actually a little bit similar. We're going to make a request. The browser actually knows how to serialize a form. A lot of us who joined in the last like 6 or 7 years know that forms are event.prevent default, and that's like, how do you do that? I don't know. So forms actually do know how to submit themselves. And so that will get routed through data mutation. It will update the persistence layer, and then it will send a redirect response unless you want to have a message that says don't hit the back button. So it sends a redirect response, and then it does basically a GET request, so the same thing as a document request for the next page, and we'll have the latest up-to-date data from that data persistence layer. Cool, so that was it. And this actually gave us a really simple mental model for building web applications. People who have been around for a while are kind of lamenting how hard it is to build web apps today because it used to be so easy. Like, it was very easy to think about. Now, of course, there were a lot of complications with like browsers and stuff. Things were complicated in that way. But as far as how you thought about it, was all just like within the body of the request. And when the request is done, it's gone. Of course, there were complex things, like we had cookies and sessions. Sometimes you had to think about the complex workflows. But for the most part, really, really simple mental model. Also, it was the only way to do it, so that's why everybody did it that way, of course. But there were some pretty significant drawbacks here also. Full page refresh was not cool. Can you imagine if every time you favorited or liked a tweet, you got a full page refresh? No thanks. I don't want that. Nobody wanted that. It was not good. And we also didn't have as much control over the UI feedback. So for this reason, progressive enhancement showed up at around 2003. and came up with this idea that, hey, we can take a foundation of a functional app and enhance it with client-side JavaScript. So if you have that foundation of a functional app, you're going to keep all the same stuff you had from your MPA, but you're going to add stuff, both on the client and the server. You need to add it on the client to enhance it with not doing a full page refresh and stuff. But you also need to have server-side code to handle those AJAX requests that are going to show up at around 2006. So architecturally, the document request actually was quite the same because we had to keep that regular MPA full page render. But we also loaded JavaScript at the end so that we could enhance things based on whatever the user's browser supported, whether they supported AJAX or not. But we get this new capability, which is client-side navigations, where you hit a link and we prevent default. And so now we have client-side routing that's going to route things, and we have client-side data fetching that's going to make a call to the backend. And then the backend will have an API route, and it will call into data fetching and get the data and send it back so that we can render that up-to-date thing. This slide is actually quite important. We'll talk about it here in a second. It's specifically that rendering bit. Yeah, that's tough. Inline mutations, also a new thing that we could do with progressively enhanced multi-page apps. So now we can finally favorite a tweet without doing a full page refresh. So our user submits the form. We prevent default to avoid the full page refresh, and we use some data mutation code that we have on the client, send it back to our backend API server, and then we get the data back and we can render. And all the while, we have control over the UI feedback, so that we can say, hey, here's a spinner, or in Twitter's case, they do optimistic UI. So you click on the heart, it instantly turns red, and then they just hope that the request works out, and then they have to roll back if it doesn't. Okay, and then redirect mutations. So this is like you're creating a GitHub issue, and you hit create, and it sends you to that issues page, right? So in this case, we're going to do a lot of the same things on the top as our inline mutation, but then we do a routing on the client and do our data fetching. So this is similar to the bottom half of the graph is actually similar to client-side navigation. Okay, so with all of this said, the pros of progressively enhanced multi-page apps is that we don't have refreshes. That was like we accomplished our original goal. We wanted to improve user experience by eliminating full-page refreshes. That's great. We also had UI feedback control, a lot more UI feedback control. You can now like favorite a bunch of tweets in a row, and you don't need to worry about like loading spinners being in the wrong place or whatever. So that was really nice. Unfortunately, we had a couple of problems that we introduced, new problems. Prevent default means that we're writing a lot more custom code, and I don't know about you, but I've noticed this correlation between how much code I have and how many bugs I have too. I know correlation doesn't imply causation, but there's something there. And we're not as good at doing what the browser does as the browser is. The browser was really good at handling race conditions and form resubmissions and all of that stuff. And by and large, we struggled with that. This one's the biggest, though, code duplication. So let's say that you land on the GitHub issues page, and you have a couple of comments on there. So you have to have a template on the server for that server render to know what a GitHub comment looks like, right? But then I add a comment, and I hit submit, and then I'm not doing a full page refresh. So I've got to have the template on the client as well. So we have code duplication here in completely different languages, whether it's Ruby or Python or whatever it was that you had on the server, and then you've got it in JavaScript too. This was enormously painful. And often we actually didn't have templates on the client. It was more like DOM manipulation. So the template was hiding in the imperative DOM manipulation code. It was just very, 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 very painful. Code organization is also a problem. Server and client interaction, also a bit of a problem. You're opening like 7 files in 2 or 3 repos. We still kind of have this problem sometimes. But so this motivated us to go to single-page apps. And basically what we did here was we said, you know what, that code duplication is dumb. I don't like it. It's stupid. So I'm just going to delete all of that duplicate code on the server side. We get rid of everything that's not an API route. We get rid of all the server-side rendering stuff. And now it's just an API route or an API server. Personally, as a front-end dev, I loved this because I just pointed my local environment to the staging server, and I didn't even have to run the backend on my machine. And I'm just like uploading files to a CDN or S3 bucket or something. Easiest deployment strategy in the world. I implemented like rollback, so like it was so easy to deploy this thing. I loved it. But we had some major problems. The document request for a SPA, single-page app, is not great. So especially for anything dynamic. So the user enters a URL that goes to your CDN. That's going to have an index HTML that has like a body with a div that says ID equals root, and that's it. This was especially at the beginning. Now a lot of people are doing static site generation, improving this a bit, but for the most part, anything dynamic, you need to have some sort of loading state or something in there. And for a lot of us who are building apps on the web today, most of the stuff we're building is dynamic. And so the browser renders that, which is basically nothing. JavaScript loads, and now we can finally show our own UI feedback while we're going to get the rest of the code that we need and then the rest of the data. And then finally, when we get the data, we can render the images. And so now finally, we're going to get the images. This is our status quo. We all use apps like this. I'm not going to call anybody out right now, but your banking website, a certain site where you go watch videos, to YouTube, I don't know. And so we've got problems. Like I don't know why it's okay, but it's not. It's not okay. The client-side navigation didn't change from Pempa. The inline mutation request didn't change from Pempa. And the redirect mutation request didn't change from Pempa. From progressively enhanced multi-page apps. I know that the acronyms might be confusing. So the only thing we changed was to make one of these worse. Why did we do that? We did it for a reason. It wasn't just for kicks. It's because the code duplication was so bad. We didn't like that. I didn't like that. So this was way better from a developer experience standpoint. But it was worse for the user experience. So we transitioned from MPA to Pempa for the user. We wanted to make the user's experience better. Transitioned from a Pempa to a SPA for the developer. We made the user experience worse. We still have most of the Pempa problems. Now we have a bundle size problem. We have waterfalls, as I described. We've got runtime performance issues because we have all this JavaScript. I mean, I realize that this device in my pocket has more power than what we sent people to the moon with. But I don't know, like it still seems to have problems loading certain websites. So we had some problems. And then state management became a thing. And you just go over to NPM and look up how many libraries there are to solve that problem. That's your evidence that state management is a really difficult problem. And this is, I would argue, the reason why we believe, or folks who've been doing web for a long time, lament how hard it is to build a web app these days. Because state management, really, really tough. So, I'm ready for a transition. I think we need something better. And I'm excited. Like, I'm outrageously excited. I am screaming at your face excited about this next transition. The transition, I'm calling it progressively enhanced single-page apps. It rhymes with Vespa. It's a PESPA. How many of you have watched Luca? I asked this question to crowds, and I'm surprised how few of you raise your hands, because it's a great movie. So go watch Luca. Let's talk about the architecture of a PESPA. In a PESPA, you're sharing code on both the client and the server. This has been tried before, and it didn't work out super great, but it's working out great now. We'll talk about this a little bit more. So now your routing code, your data fetching, data mutation, and rendering can be shared across the client and the server. The document request looks just like a Pempa, exactly like a Pempa. The client-side navigation, very similar to a Pempa, except now we're not duplicating code between the client and the server. We're using the same code between the two. The inline mutation request, very similar architecture, and the router has a lot more to say about how things get routed to the right code on both the client and the server. It's not super important that you understand or take pictures of all these slides, by the way. I've got all these charts in the blog post that you'll see at the end here. And then the redirect mutation request also. Client and server share a lot of the code right here. And a lot of this is managed by our router. And ultimately, that rendering code, that code is actually also shared on the client and the server. But when we're just doing the SPA piece of this, that's only going to run on the client. So let's talk about some of the pros. We have the simple mental model again. When you're working in a PESPA architecture, it feels like you're working in an MPA architecture. It really does. It just feels that simple. We don't have the full page refresh. We have our UI feedback control. Our browser, it feels like you're just working with the browser the way that it was intended. And we'll actually look at some code to see what that feels like. And we got rid of the code duplication of Pempas, progressively enhanced multi-page apps. We also reduced client-side JavaScript because we're just moving as much of our stuff over to the server as we can. most of our business logic and everything. The only stuff that's client-side only is going to be progressive enhancement stuff, which is pretty simple. And we got rid of waterfalls because it's all server rendered again, hooray, and no application state management. You can't have application state management if you are focused on progressive enhancement because it has to work without JavaScript. So if your app requires application state management, then it's not going to work without JavaScript. That's not a PESPA. Of course, there is state that happens in the client, like whether this dropdown or this modal is open or whatever. There's going to be state. But that state's easy. It's the application state management that's really hard. Cons are difficult because when you start dating somebody new, you don't know all of their weak points. And then eventually you're dating them for a while and you realize that they do have weak points, but you love them anyway because we all do. And we're all struggling. So I want to talk about a couple that people have brought up, but we will definitely discover more. So one is that it requires servers. For me, when I was doing a spa, I just loved sending stuff to a CDN and forgetting about it. But now I have to worry about a server. Most applications have to worry about a server at some point. It's just that now the devs working on the front end of the web app have to think about this too. So yeah, there's that. Server cost is also typically the people who are worried about this are like, I can just put it on a CDN, I don't need to worry about it. If that's the type of site that you have, then you can actually use cache headers that will tell the CDN to cache things, and you have the exact same type of architecture anyway. And so I don't see that as a huge issue. But also, Cloudflare is going to give us 1 million requests for 15 cents. So I don't know what to tell you. Infrastructure is a lot cheaper than it used to be. Also, universal code, you've got to make sure that your code runs in both places. And then, of course, we will discover more issues as this goes on. But I'm very, very excited that we're making a transition that is better not only for UX, but also for DX. This is great. Makes things a lot simpler. An example implementation of this, Remix. So I was a co-founder and director of developer experience at Remix. Remix was announced yesterday that it was purchased by Shopify, so that's exciting. I am no longer at Remix, working full-time on Epic Web. But I want to talk about Remix a little bit specifically, how Remix does this. So this is an example of a Remix route. So your loader runs only on the server. So you can use private keys, you don't worry about cores, you can talk to a database directly, whatever you want to do in here. And then that data gets sent over to the UI code via use loader data. So Remix uses React right now. In the future, you'll be able to use other UI libraries, whatever you want. If you're like, ooh, it uses React, I don't like React. I promise, anything that you don't like about React is not really a problem in Remix. React just feels like a template solution, which is awesome. And React actually can do a lot of really cool things. I'd love to talk to you about it later. But we bring in our data, we render out our data, and then we can also render out a form. And it's just a regular form. This is why I say it feels like an MPA. So you just have this form component, and Remix progressively enhances it so you avoid the full page refresh. And we also can progressively enhance this by hooking into the pending state of the form so we can show some sort of pending UI for our users. And then when that finally is submitted, that's going to go to our backend code, which is in the exact same file. And so we're like, here's where they submit it. It goes right here. It's amazing. And so now we can do all the server stuff that we need to do, validation, anything that you need to do to create the data that you're going to create, whatever it is. And then we can send that data back to our UI if we have some sort of error, and we can display the errors. All in a single file that magically works in a wonderful way, where this code is shared. So that UI code is shared both between the client and the server, and Remix manages making sure that form submissions go to the right place and GET requests make it to the right place. And it's outrageously fast. Very, very cool. So I love things like this where somebody's like, oh, I was just building my app and having a really great DX, and then I accidentally stumbled into an awesome UX. I didn't even try the Lighthouse score, and then when I decided to try it on an authenticated, most expensive page with no caching, and I got a 100 performance score. I'm sure that was not on mobile. Maybe it was. But excellent. Like, awesome DX and accidentally awesome UX, sign me up. I'm super into this. So I'm finished. The last link on the resources slide here is a link to a GitHub repo where I implemented all of the architectures, the same app and all the architectures, so you can compare and see the differences. And then this is the blog post where I kind of explain this a little bit in deeper, more detail. I just have one last thing to say to you all, and it's this. You belong here. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad the code wasn't 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I don't know, was that the morning's code? But no, it's all good. Hey everybody, I'm Bob. I'm an engineer at Google, and I run the Google Open Source Security team. And we're a group within Google that's 100% focused on making upstream better. Not just for Google, obviously a massive user of open source, but ultimately we feel like it's our role as we contribute many projects and use those projects. We need to give back and help make the world and help make the ecosystem a better place. So a quick talk this afternoon is kind of maybe a little bit of a kitschy title, but drowning in information but starving for wisdom. Start out with maybe kind of an elephant that might be in the room. Probably everybody's heard a little bit about open source security in the past year, 2 years, whether it's SolarWinds, CodeCov, Log4Shell. There might be something going on with OpenSSL today that folks have heard about. This is while I'm joking about it, this is a very serious topic. Upstream is a massive place of innovation and goodness, but it's also a place where it's easy to take shortcuts, and it's easy to have mismatched or unbalanced expectations between the people that are using the code that we create as well as the folks that are creating it. And so when we think about open source security and where we are today, you know, when you're ever pitching to an exec, you always want to have your chart that goes up and to the right. This is not an up and to the right chart that you want to show, which is essentially that if you look at the next generation of supply chain attacks that are coming out there, whether it be typo squatting, malware, protestware, these things are going up exponentially, which is not good. And if you haven't had a chance to look at Sonatype's State of the Supply Chain, I would highly recommend it. There's a ton of really good information in there. So if you look at what's going on upstream, not a lot, a ton of great innovation, but a lot of attacks that are happening. And with SolarWinds, the federal government kind of woke up and said, okay, well, we need to do something about this, not just because this affects everybody in the US, but it's fundamentally open source is used in all the critical infrastructure that runs our country. We need to do something about this. So in true fashion of the government, I'm not going to go political, so don't worry. We have an executive order that was issued that basically said we got to get better. And as a follow-on to that, right now there's a bill pending in Congress to ultimately staff and put a lot of money into fixing the state of upstream. But a lot of these bills, when you actually go and parse through them, and I thought about printing out one of the bills, it's super, super full of paper. It would have been horrible for the trees. But if you net it out, the executive order essentially said S-bombs everywhere. And if you haven't heard of what an S-bomb is, I'll cover that here in a second. But basically said, we got to start by being able to look inside a software and understand what is inside of this stuff. And so if you think back historically, the US went through a similar transformation in its ingredients list. And so often you hear this analogy between what's an S-bomb. Well, it's a recipe, or it's a list of ingredients of what gets put into a particular piece of software. Well, right now, if you go pick up, whether it's a USB key off of the street or you go download something off of PyPI, do you really know everything that's actually in that binary file that you just downloaded with a script that actually runs at install time on your laptop? You probably don't. And most people probably don't have that awareness. So the EO really said, let's start by getting S-bombs everywhere. Now this next piece of legislation that's currently under debate essentially said, S-bombs, yeah, we should do that, and we should also make sure that software has 0 vulnerabilities. Yeah, exactly. That's the same reaction. Again, very noble vision for where to end up. Practically, there's kind of a fine print in the language that basically says you can have vulnerabilities as long as you have a plan for remediating them. But the aspiration there of having no vulns is ultimately something that, while we should aspire to as an ecosystem and as a community, we should recognize that we're never going to get there. So talking about S-bombs, what are they? If you think about kind of the ingredient list that's on the side of your Coke can or on the side of your favorite snack, it's literally just an inventory of what's inside that particular piece of software. And ultimately, if you go through that S-bomb, you should be able to walk all of those dependencies, and then you should be able to go find the S-bombs for all the dependencies and find their dependencies, and hurdles all the way down. That's a saying in security, right? That no matter how far you're going to look, you're going to continue to look over and over and over. So S-bombs, in theory, provide us a lot of information, but in reality, we've got this regulatory pressure to generate a lot of them. incentives that are here are to get them published, not to actually have them be accurate and what I would phrase as high fidelity or like rich in content that's actually actionable. So we're going to end up likely in a situation where somebody is going to be on this stage next year, and we're going to have SBOMs everywhere. But are they actually going to be useful? I would posit that without some real focus from the ecosystem and the industry, probably not. We're going to have a ton of information that we can't actually make a whole lot of sense out of. So just to give you an example here, I got an SBOM, I start to crack it open, I look at this list of dependencies, and for each one, I should be able to figure out which ones have vulnerabilities and which ones don't. But I have to trust the vendor or the person that gave it to me in order to make sure that that information was accurate. Well, it may have been accurate at the time they published it, but what about all the vulnerabilities that were found in all of the dependencies that come along, right? Are they actively keeping these SBOMs up to date, or are they simply checking a box that procurement feels good about, and that there's an SBOM and we can go along our merry way? So we have to be very careful when we think about kind of the rise of information here. Frankly, is it signal or is it just noise? So what I want to avoid is this situation, and if there's any It's Always Sunny fans out in the audience, it's one of my favorite shows, but I want to avoid security engineers ultimately having this kind of conversation with their boss or their other engineers on their team and saying like, how do I make sense of everything that's out there? I've got boss and regulatory pressure to go answer to, but frankly, I can just have noise. I can't really make sense of all of this. So we want to do better than this. The good news is that the community is already rising to the challenge. So I want to highlight 2 projects today that we're investing in at Google, but are again, communities that we're collaborating with many other companies to ultimately make this space hopefully a little bit more palatable and have more meaningful wisdom that we can extract from that. So the first thing I want to mention is actually not pieces of information. It's actually the trust foundation that it all has to sit on. If I hand somebody in the audience a piece of paper and say, this is the SBOM for a given package on PyPI, why should you trust me? I could have just made that up and convinced you that there was nothing bad in that package. I need to have an explicit linkage between the author of that package and the producer of that information. And so digital signatures are one way to actually bind identity as well as provide non-reputability and integrity of the message, which is great. How many of you have ever tried to use PGP? How many of you have enjoyed that experience? Yeah, exactly. Maybe one. So part of the projects that we're working on are really about fundamentally reinventing what digital signatures can be from a developer experience and recognizing that kind of the approaches that are out there, they're cryptographically okay, but they're not very usable. So we have to do better in not only establishing a greater use of these technologies, but we've got to make sure that they're in place at the same time that we start to generate these signals like SBOM. So we talk about kind of the fancy word for this is attestations, or if you want to think about it as metadata. So we've got SBOMs, we've got build provenance coming out of a project called Salsa, we've got vulnerability information, we've got a new set of attestations called VEX, which are essentially like tell you about which vulnerabilities were claimed to be on a particular project but aren't actually vulnerable. So VEX gives you some information about that. And so the ecosystem is rising to try to give you more and more rich information, not just of a point-in-time view, but actually kind of think of it as a real-time data feed of everything that you would need to know about your software coming from open source. But again, tons of documents. How are you going to go and not be Charlie Day in the last GIF up there? Right? We need tools to ultimately aggregate and synthesize this information to make it more actionable. And then finally, once we actually have meaningful signals, we can start to feed those into policy systems and actually make developers' lives a lot better. So 2 quick projects I want to highlight this afternoon. One is called OSV. This is a project that essentially synthesizes vulnerability databases together into a very clean and simple REST API. And the API basically just says, give me a commit hash or give me a package name and version number. And I will give you the aggregated and synthesized vulnerability information for that particular artifact at a point in time. Feels like that should have existed, right? Like that's a pretty straightforward question that folks want to ask. And today, without OSV, if you go to try to answer that, you've got to go independently poll a bunch of different databases, different opinions on priority and scoring. It's a mess. So OSV really tries to simplify that, synthesize that information, and federate it all together in a very consumable way. Another project that was just very early stages, but we're trying to build out, kind of to the Salsa theme that I mentioned earlier. We've got to have something to go with our Salsa, so we started a project called GUAC, or Graph for Understanding Artifact Composition. And if you think about this, right, we've got all these sources of data, and they all have relationships with one another. how do I actually start to learn about those relationships and understand, like, hey, Log4Shell popped, where is it in my organization? What applications should I really be worried about? Right now, that's a lot of scanning, it's a lot of manual rote effort to go find those sorts of things. So Guac really aims to be able to help provide that information, as well as provide evidence such that policy engines can actually be trusted to make the right decisions around what you push into prod and what you leave out. And so with Guac, we hope to build up not only a single graph, but also kind of this academic term called a hypergraph, which kind of connects all these different things. You can overlay trust domains, different data sources, and ultimately custom tune what data you might care about within your enterprise, as well as the data from upstream. Pulling all of that together is where we want to go with Guac. So in essence, I hope you take away from this that there's a lot of good work going on. I'd point you at the OpenSSF as one community where a lot of this work is ultimately happening. And thanks for your time.
All right. Hey, everyone. My name is Stephen Augustus. I'm the head of open source at Cisco, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about maintaining the maintainers, and also going to see if this slide clicker works. Yes, awesome. So hi, I am a maintainer. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the projects that I've worked on in the past. I'm going to do a quick run, and then I'm going to talk to some of the maintainers in the room, if that's cool. So that's me. Hi. I'm currently one of the steering committee members for Kubernetes, one of the SIG release chairs. So my team is basically responsible for releasing one of the largest software projects, open source software projects on the internet. And I'm also one of the release managers there. For the OpenSSF, I'm a governing board member. I'm also one of the scorecard maintainers for OpenAPI, part of the business governing board, as well as a DEX maintainer on the CNCF side. Previously, I was a chair for Tag Contributor Strategy, chair of SIG PM, chair of SIG Azure for Kubernetes. I founded the Inclusive Naming Initiative. I also founded a few things in Kubernetes. If you've heard of KEPS, you can blame me for that. The Release Engineering Subproject, as well as Working Group Naming, which was a precursor to Inclusive Naming Initiative. So I say all of that to say, I kind of look at things in three lenses. The lens of the contributor, the lens of a maintainer, and a lens of the sponsor. But again, I'm a maintainer, so we're going to talk about maintainers today. Can we do a little call response? Like, how many maintainers do I have in the room? Come on, come on. Shy maintainers today. No. Anybody who's looking to be a maintainer eventually? All right, all right. So maintainers tend to be passionate about the work, really generous with their time, and just always willing to roll up the sleeves. However, maintainers are also over-practiced in the art of self-sacrifice. They're usually not incentivized to work on sustainability work that's important for open source communities, and they're under-supported by companies who support open source projects. And last but not least, we're tired. We're kind of all the things that we pick up cause us to be tired all the time. So here's a list of things that have made our lives easier kind of within the last few years and just in general. We've got social unrest. We've got a pandemic. We've got burnout in general, right? So I think, just coming here from KubeCon, two of the talks that I wanted to highlight from friends. No one is saving us but us, from Paris Pittman and Tabby Sable, and How to Become an Open Source Mechanic from Emily Fox. I found that a lot of the time that I spent at KubeCon this time around was around things that have kind of fallen into the ocean. I think about Kubernetes, for example. A few years back, Google donated $9 million in GCP credits for the Kubernetes project, and we kind of have a stipend of 3 million credits, $3 million in credits each year. The Kubernetes project has gone more than $600,000 over that allotment for this year, and the year's not over. So things that we tend to not always think about, things that are not as shiny as we'd like them to be, like sustaining the infrastructure for an open source project are things that are keeping maintainers up at night. So I would strongly suggest once those talks are available on YouTube, go check that out. Really good talks, and I think overall the conversation at KubeCon was around sustaining maintainers, sustaining open source projects, and their maintainers. So for maintainers in the room, I'm going to ask you to try to save yourself. If you've been on a plane recently, you know, when you get the safety video, it's like, hey, please affix your mask before helping others. So I want you to save yourself first. So things that you are not. You're not a project savior. You're not the only person who has the answer to every question that comes up. And you're not some magical being that has infinite time and resources. Right? So I want you to think about that every time you offer to pick up new things, right? The bus factor is always something that comes up, right? If you were to leave a project today for your own personal reasons or for otherwise, would it survive? And if not, why? If you're not asking yourself that question, you're not doing your job as a maintainer. So step one, don't lick the cookies. What do I mean by cookies? I think we get excited about new opportunities, new initiatives, and you're like, yes, I have that skill set. I'm going to jump right in. I can totally do that. Everything you sign up for comes with a cost, and that cost is distributed across whatever the new initiative is, all of the things that you have already signed up for, and your mental health. So stop signing up for things. As long as you cannot figure out how to scale yourself, try not to sign up for things. So step two is scaling yourself. And how do we do that? I don't think we have a finite list of ways to do that, but let's talk about a few. Are your responsibilities well documented? Are they well understood? Are they teachable? Are they mentorable? I think, for a project like Scorecard, I was talking about it previously, Scorecard and All-Star, I really love that there's this powerful concept where you can, if you're on GitHub, if you're on popular code hosting platforms, you can set policies against things like community health documentation, right? So does your repo have contributing.md? Does it have a maintaining.md? Do I know where to go to find the maintainers? Do I know what to do when I need to report a security vulnerability? Do I understand what the code of conduct is for that project? Do I understand how to reach out to people if I need to report something related to that code of conduct? If you don't, that is a great place to start in terms of documenting what your responsibilities are. Are they well understood? If you are deep in the weeds, you're a technical lead for something, have you ever thought of taking the time to record a demo about how your piece of the project works, right? We talk a lot about one-to-one mentoring, right? And getting that FaceTime with individuals. Think about one-to-many. Think about what your group mentoring opportunities are. So this is recording videos. This is taking the stage and explaining a process to people. This is making sure that the documentation is so tight that people can teach themselves. And again, if it's not well understood, if it's not highly visible, people are much less likely to do that. So that's more or less it. Bob and I were talking about how his talk was going to be depressing, my talk was going to be depressing. We were like, is anything going to? We're going to leave people at the end of the day with some depressing talks. But I'm going to leave maintainers with everything that we've talked about. Have we asked the same of our fellow maintainers? Because ultimately, we're the only ones who are going to save ourselves. And if you take the opportunity to have those conversations with your fellow maintainers, I guarantee you're going to find some gaps that you haven't seen before. So thank you for your time, and we'll catch you later. Enjoy the rest of ATO.
Day one for me, I guess it's day 3 for many of you at the 10th All Things Open. As I said this morning, this is, kind of bar none, my favorite conference of the year. It is the best run conference in my opinion. It is the most inclusive and diverse conference in tech for certain, and we're so pleased to be in our 8th year of partnering with All Things Open with something that we call IoT Demo Night. And that's going to start about 6 o'clock downstairs. You can go back and forth from the front patio where All Things Open Social is, down to where our social is. There's food and drinks, I think, at both of them. We have a bunch of startup companies and folks that are doing some cool stuff where you can interact with them, and I'll explain that in a moment. But what we're going to do right now is a little bit experimental. So first, if you don't mind putting my slides up, I'm going to just give a quick introduction of who we are, and then we're going to run a game show. We've never done this before. We're excited about it, but our goal is potentially to give away 2 jobs tonight. And so, first of all, welcome. Thank you for hanging out here with us for a few minutes this evening. I'm Tom Snyder. I founded Riot back in 2014, along with a couple of other collaborators. I'm going to talk about one of my co-founders here in a moment. Our goal is job creation and economic development and creating vibrant communities. And through most of our history, and we've grown quite a bit, we're operating on a national basis. Once upon a time, we were the Raleigh Internet of Things. That's where Riot came from. We were a meetup group. But we're a nonprofit organization operating around the country. We run startup accelerators. We do a lot of convening, hold about 70 events per year, lots of different activities. This will be our first game show tonight. But everything is focused around how do we create a more inclusive economy? How do we help people to move kind of up the wealth ladder through small business ownership, through creating new tech startups and growing. And we work with a huge number of corporate partners that make this all possible. If you want to promote some of the things we're doing this evening, we've got #IoT Demo Night. There's ways to contact us. But as I mentioned, there's almost 100 corporate partners that provide funding on an annual basis to Riot. And I'd be happy to talk to anyone in here whose logo is not on the screen. For those that are, please thank them. Many of them are here this evening exhibiting down in the mezzanine level and across All Things Open. They enable us to provide completely free resources to aspiring entrepreneurs. And many of those companies also leverage our programs on their own internal innovation programs and studies, which is exciting. There's one company that I really want to call out this evening, DNA Group. This is an organization, if you need anything made, and we're talking in the tech space, so electronics, electronic packaging, circuit boards, other kinds of things. This organization can help figure out the right way to get that done, help pull it all together. They have been a great partner for Riot for many years, and they, this evening, have taken what I think is the coveted sponsorship, the beer sponsor, but even more than that. They've enabled a lot of free food and drink that will be happening downstairs. I think we got 3 kegs this evening from a local craft brewery called Trophy. But make sure to stop by and talk to the DNA Group team. They're wonderful partners. But why we're here is that the world is becoming increasingly connected through what we called IoT, and now we really think of as the data economy. We are automating every market vertical. We see, obvious efforts in things like autonomous vehicles, self-driving cars, self-flying drones, things that are automated in that space. Think about, we used to go to the doctor maybe twice a year. We had 2 data points to manage our health, right? Now we can do, with an Apple Watch or other connected device, we can do persistent health monitoring. We can automate our ability, to take care of ourselves in better ways. And we're seeing this with, the digital electric grid. We're seeing it in smart agriculture. We're seeing it in smart cities. Anything with smart in it. One day we're going to just call it a watch again, right? But right now that's kind of this data economy and this automation, and it creates huge opportunity. But we're in this interesting point where we've just come out of a pandemic. There's a lot of concern and worry that we might be in the face of a recession, right? Interest rates are going up. Companies are starting to lay employees off at the same time that they have thousands of job openings, millions of job openings across the United States. And on the labor side of things, there's been this great resignation, right? A lot of people have said, I want to do something more meaningful. I want to find a new career. For many folks that have not worked in tech, the question is, are there ways to get into tech? And what I would challenge is, for the technology companies here that are hiring, maybe there's a large swath of the population that isn't getting the consideration that they should for some of the opportunities that you have and some of the jobs that are available in the country. And so how do we make this connection? Lots of people looking for work, lots of employers looking for talent, and yet the common discourse is always, we can't find the talent that we're looking for, right? And maybe it's because we need to change the lens a little bit. And I'm happy to announce that, the world is hiring. There is not a day goes by I don't have companies reach out saying, hey, I'm looking for XYZ. Who do you know in the Riot network? And we try and make those connections, but we're not a recruiting organization. So we thought recently, startup accelerators, entrepreneurial support, as I said, that's helping people through small business ownership to move up the wealth ladder. But a lot of people just need to start by moving up the income ladder. How do you help people to build the digital skills that your organizations need? And so we have 2 programs I'm happy to announce, funded by American Rescue Plan funding. One is in Wake Forest, North Carolina, just about a half hour north of here. And we've just signed a project in Wilmington, North Carolina, where we're going into lower income census districts. We're going into more rural parts of counties and other areas, folks who maybe haven't had all the resources that you have in a downtown Raleigh or a Research Triangle Park, and looking at the 3.5 million middle skill jobs, and that's not my term, but a term that's being used for jobs that don't require a college diploma, but they require a certain software certification of some kind, whether that's a Salesforce cert, a Cisco cert, Google, Cisco, like all the big companies have these, kind of these online courses that you can find and other kind of curriculum, but there's an awful lot of communities that aren't ready just to even access that much. And so we've got a digital bridge program where we're going into these communities, helping to train them up. And then the goal is many of the kinds of jobs that, a graphic artist, for instance, once they know a particular piece of software, can do a craft, or somebody can manage a call center, or they can be an IT system administrator. There's lots of jobs that we can get people in 6 to 12 months of training. And this is a completely free program for the community, but the call to action is we're looking for companies that will post jobs on a business process outsourcing platform we have, where we can train people specifically to your job and make that connection. We are looking for folks that want to volunteer to mentor and to coach into programs that have certification curriculum that we can put into the learning management system. This is really an effort. There's so much focus on DEI. How do we bring a more diverse workforce? Well, a lot of that diversity is not in the places where you're recruiting today. Let us help you to do that. So that's something that we're passionate about. Really just wanted to kind of do that as an announcement of a program that we're working on, and I'll invite you to come to our Riot booth or come to speak to us afterwards if you or your organization wants to get engaged. But tonight, we're going to look at kind of maybe the more traditional job that you might be thinking of if you're looking to hire software developers, technical sales, other kinds of folks. And we're going to run an experiment. We've got 3 brave companies that are all involved in some way or another in engineering software consultant work, where they do client work for others. And we've got a couple of talented candidates that are open to maybe a new job opportunity. And we're going to see if we can't make a match. And so let me first introduce our panelists or our 3 companies to come up, and I'll introduce them. And while we do this, I'm going to pull a couple of chairs up on stage. All right, welcome. And so we're going to start, let's start at the far end of the row. Chris Lamb, Device Solutions. Chris, tell us who you are, a little bit about your company, and why you're here this evening.
Good evening, Tom. Okay, managed to start the meeting without being on mute, so that's a good start. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for having us. I'm Chris Lamb, the CEO and co-founder at Device Solutions. We're a team of 40 embedded engineers developing embedded products for 20 years now. And we develop the guts of the things in the Internet of Things. So we're the ones who make them work. We have deep and long experience with radios and antennas. We're always looking for people to help us deliver products and prototypes for our customers.
Hardware, software, all over the map, right?
Yeah, embedded
tell
hardware
us a little bit about what kind of clients you look for.
Mostly the ones who can pay.
All right, do we have any out here who have some money? That's right, yeah.
Those are the most important ones, but we really do embedded work. So we're not doing the cloud, we're not doing server and apps. We're focusing on the things, the devices themselves.
Right, and just quickly, like, what does day-to-day look like for folks in your organization?
day-to-day is hands-on with devices. So we're going to give you either a dev board or a prototype, and we're either debugging it, drawing the schematics behind it, or writing the software running on it,
Cool.
trying to meet the customer requirements.
Awesome. Welcome to the Big Job Contest. The first, hopefully, of many. We'll see how this goes. Amy.
Yes.
Welcome to the program. Tell us who Amy Baldwin is and about Acceleration.
Absolutely. I'm Amy. I'm from Acceleration. We're fairly new to the Raleigh area. We're a software consultancy. However, our mission is to educate developing engineers who are still learning, whether they're undergrads or perhaps they're changing careers. So we have lead, senior, mentor engineers on our development teams, junior, mid, and learners, and they all work for our clients. So our learners, up to our senior mentors, are working directly with our clients.
I have seen more students this year at ATO than any other year, which is incredible. Tell us how you kind of like herd the cats and create great outcomes for your clients.
Absolutely. We heard the cats by being the #2 internship in the country. I won't say who we're behind because I think they're here. But our clients come to us because we offer a cost value for sure because our blended rate is lower, but they also get a pipeline that could possibly last for years because our students stay with us longer than 3 months. Sometimes we have them for 3.5 years because they want to stay. That's what we do.
And then some of them move on to the client when they graduate, or they stay with you?
Yes, they move on to the West Coast or wherever they want to go, DC. They get tired of the traffic, and about 5 years later, they call us and go, hey, do you have a job? And they get to come back. We've experienced that a couple times. We've also worked for one of our graduates who is a CTO, and they came back and hired us. So it's a great program. We've been running for about 12 years now.
Fantastic. Welcome to the Big Job Contest.
Thank you.
All right, and Nick Jordan to wrap us up with Smashing Boxes. I apologize.
Sure.
Looks like I hit backwards there. There you are.
Okay, thanks. Hey, I'm Nick Jordan. I'm an entrepreneur in the Raleigh-Durham area. I own a software development agency called Smashing Boxes. 2 years ago, we also spun out a venture studio called SB Ventures, and I also do some local angel investing as well. So I'm excited to be here because talent is one of our most important resources that we bring to bear in terms of our company. But it's also one of the most important resources that any company, startup, and or otherwise can leverage for their future success.
So you definitely, the company name implies a certain culture. The client projects come out in one piece at the end, right? So tell us how you work differently.
Sometimes. Well, I think we say that our DNA is entrepreneurial spirit. And to us, that means that every problem is an opportunity. And therefore, there are no constraints, right? So we, inside of the box, outside of the box, or are you smashing the box? So when you first realize that there are no constraints, you're free to think creatively about how you're going to solve a problem. And, to kind of preempt some of the other ones in terms of day in the life, sometimes it's very straightforward and it's, here's my daily stand-up, here's my commit, here's my client meeting. Other times we're walking into situations where there's just a big bad problem or a big market opportunity, and we need to use our brain power to solve it, and then our tools and our skills in terms of design and engineering.
All right, well, welcome to the Big Job Contest. To kind of get us started before we bring our contestants on stage, each of these companies we met with ahead of the program, they are looking for a variety of kinds of skills and talents. So our two contestants this evening come from a little bit different background. We'll get to know them in just a moment. Our companies, we came together, came up with a list of questions that we're going to ask, and in order to do that, we need the other half of the hiring equation. So I'm going to ask Brandon Mathis and Carly Pavlanak to come up on stage, please. All right, these are a couple of brave souls right here. Let's give a round of applause for them and for our companies. All right, so you have your choice, actually. You can grab the podium or the handheld as you prefer, but Brandon, let's start with you. Just quick introduction of yourself, a little bit of your background.
Yeah, check. Okay, cool. Yeah, I feel pretty comfortable just standing here, not behind the podium, so I think I'm good. Yeah, Brandon Mathis. I'm a freelance full-stack developer. Live here in the Raleigh, North Carolina area. I've had the privilege to work with a lot of different companies, both large and small, in varying different industries and in varying different capacities and things of that matter. Particular stack I specialize in from a technology standpoint is, I need to hold this closer to my mouth. Okay. Typical technologies I mostly specialize in is React, React.js, all things React, and Ruby on Rails. So React Native, React on the web, Ruby on Rails backend, stuff like that. Building software, that's me.
Cool. So we're going to get to know you a little bit better in a moment. From a job perspective, tell us something about yourself you would not reveal in a job interview.
Wow. Something about myself that I would not reveal in a job interview. Holy crap,
It's
man.
not an interview,
I mean, I'm
this is a
such
contest.
honestly, I'm an open book of an
I did
individual.
not prep him for that question.
I don't hold anything back. I'm really honest with people in a job interview because I expect for them to be honest to me right back. And if I'm holding something back, then I'm creating an environment where they could be holding something back. And I don't want to be interviewed in a scenario like that. So I don't really have an answer to that, man. I don't hold anything back. I'm all in.
That's all right. He's all in. That's why he's on stage this evening, ladies and gentlemen. So thank you very much. Carly, we introduce you quickly, and then we'll jump into the questions. So please.
Hi, everybody. My name is Carly Pavlinac Blackburn, and I am a digital brand marketing manager. Previously a startup founder, created a company, a fitness app for celebrity trainers to monetize their social media following, raised venture capital funding all the way to acquisition, and then worked at the company that acquired us, and then a marketing agency, and now I'm here.
Very cool. So one of the things that they don't tell you in the entrepreneurial space is when your company gets acquired by somebody else, you maybe can work for someone else's company, or you can be unemployed.
Yes.
Right?
So that's where I'm at now, looking for a job.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for being here as well. Brandon, we're going to start with you. As I said, we have 4 questions that we're going to ask. These are questions that we brought together as a group. And as he answers, if you have any reactions, please share them from our corporate panelists here. But the first question is, what is the most creative method that you have used to reach a new client?
That's an interesting question because, I mean, I'm sorry. I guess I have interesting answers to every question you could ask. But as a tech person, I live in a little bit of a bubble where there's so many opportunities, especially for someone with experience, so many opportunities out there that, for me, it's really a matter of attracting the right opportunities and the opportunities that fit for me. So I would say the most interesting technique that I've used is to kind of just fundamentally change the way that I engage with the community at large, and always think of myself as kind of being on a stage and selling myself and selling my skill sets, and also keeping, that selling part a little limited in, so I can hear what other people have to offer, because I'm always out there on the hunt looking for like the next cool fit, the next interesting project, someone who's working in something that I've never seen before, or something that I've already, always had a desire to get experience with. So it's not a tactic that I've ever engaged on one specific thing, apart from the typical crank all night on an RFP, response and a collated deck with a cool cover letter, and stuff like that. But literally just kind of changing the way that I operate in the community at large and getting as engaged as I possibly can.
Very nice. So scale of 1 to 10 from the panelists. How comfortable are you with really non-traditional sales methods? 10. I see a 10, Chris. 8, 10. All right. We have some risk takers.
Perfect score.
That's great. Fantastic. All right. Second question. What is the best way to stay on top of technology or to solve a technical challenge you haven't found before?
Well, I mean, the best way to stay on top of technology is you're doing it right here now, in my opinion. I mean, you have to come to events like this. You have to engage with the community and not just watch YouTube tutorials online and read books. You're only going to get so far with that. You need to get out there into the community and understand what it is that people are using in the real world and what their successes have been with that and what failures they've experienced with that, so that you can avoid those same pitfalls. In terms of how I approach a problem that I've never encountered before, I try to seek out a professional human who has encountered that error before. If I can't find someone who's never encountered this before, then that means I'm kind of in the territory of invention and maybe creating something that no one has ever seen before, no one's ever solved before. So I really just dive into the deep end all the way. Don't even ease in. Just get all the way into the problem as hard as you can and make a bunch of mistakes.
So
And,
a place like All Things Open where you can meet collaborators, open source support.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Absolutely.
What's an area of emerging technology that like is new that you're really looking for in your companies?
Ooh.
They want to jump in? I'm asking the panel first.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, well, we're doing more and more processing and machine learning at the edge, which is a challenge because you don't have the data set to do the training or the horsepower to do the learnings.
Yep. Fantastic. Nick? Amy?
I'd say the same. Just kind of thinking about what is the future of AI and how do we create empathy through that process and who is an expert and who's not, and it's all fairly subjective seeming. So,
Yeah.
thinking through that with talented team members is important.
Awesome. Anything you want to add?
We have a really great problem that when our clients come to us, we get to work on what their vision is and what they're wanting to do. So I think we get the unique things coming to us, which works for us. We
Wonderful.
don't have to go searching.
Awesome, awesome. All right, third question. You're halfway there. Describe for us a past project that you're particularly proud of and why.
There's a few that I'm particularly proud of, but there's one in particular that comes to mind where I really feel like I made a big impact in some people's lives. And that was, I was working on a medical application. Actually, it was in partnership with Nick over here at Smashing Boxes a while back. And it was it was directed at the Dana-Farber Cancer Research Institute. It was a web application that integrated with individuals' Fitbits and other other personal medical monitoring devices. I guess call Fitbit that maybe, but it integrated with all these cool systems to kind of measure and track activity and track people's physical health, what they ate, what their diet was, and things like that. Post-cancer treatment, specifically as it pertains to breast cancer, and it was really cool getting to work with all these modern integrations from a tech standpoint, and also like knowing that deep down this is something that is really going to make, a really positive impact out there in society. That was cool.
Very cool, very cool. All right, do we have any Riot Underground listeners in the audience? See a few hands up. So we have a podcast called the Riot Underground, and every guest that comes on the podcast gets this fourth question that's coming to you, which is a podcast is an audio-only production. Here you get to see who's on stage, but we ask if you could cast yourself in the biopic about your life, or is it biopic? I never know if it's, anyway. Who would you cast to play Brandon Mathis, and why?
Well, I feel like I give the obvious answer of I'd play myself, but if I had to give a straight up
Aspiring
answer,
actor.
right? I know it's a little conceited, but if I had to pick somebody, I would say I would pick someone with a similar personality, physical build, look, and general outlook towards life. So probably Channing Tatum. Say.
Channing Tatum.
Definitely.
All right.
Yeah.
All right.
I thought you were going to say Christian Bale, but
It's close. It's
All
close.
right.
Yeah.
And who would play Smashing Boxes?
Well, I was on this podcast, and I think I recall the answer being like Russell Crowe when he was that really angry fat truck driver movie. That's my current. That's not my future state. It's just my current state.
All right,
So I do recall that.
we'll
that
see if that
episode.
improves your odds of getting a match here. or not.
I think so.
I don't
yeah.
know.
Well,
but
it's just, yeah. Okay. I'm working
All right.
on that one.
that's good. All right. We'll come back to you all in a moment. So here's how this is going to work: is we have got 4 possible offers for Brandon, and he's going to think about which, if any, of these offers does he want to take with our potential employers, and the employers are going to think about that as well. So everyone has an ABCD. You're right here. If I can give you your choices, and if we can put the choices on the screen, please. And so secretly, everybody select. Is this a relationship where the company wants to say, you know what, we're a good steward of the community. We want to consult with Brandon, help him find the right fit, but maybe that isn't the right fit for us, or we need to really explore more deeply. We want to give him a freelance job, something to try the waters, get engaged with our organization, and fulfill some real client work. Are we going to go something that's a little bit bigger in a part-time kind of an environment, or are we interested in exploring a full-time opportunity? So We don't have the Jeopardy music here. We've got some media in the crowd. They're recording this evening, so we didn't have a license for that. But play Jeopardy in your mind for a moment. We're going to give you about 15 or 20 seconds. Each of you make your selections, and then we're going to reveal to the crowd and see, do we have a match? All right, does everybody want to hum? There you are. Yeah, well, I think you can sing without a license. All right, do we have any IP attorneys in the audience? All right, is everybody ready? All right, 1, 2, 3, let's see what we have revealed. CBC from our audience, and Brandon has a B, so we've got a match with acceleration in the middle. This is like Shark Tank. We're going to take them backstage after the show. They're going to cut their deal. Tomorrow morning at the opening keynote, we have a few announcements. We'll see if there's anything that happens between now and then, but thank you for being our first match on the program.
Congratulations, Brandon. You're an intern.
All right. Carly, you've seen a little bit of how this works now, right?
Yep, I'm ready.
The good news is your first question is the same question that Brandon got, which is, tell us about a really creative way that you tried to connect with a new client.
So a couple of weeks ago, this is not with a new client, but a creative way I showed up for a job was I actually put my resume on a cake and sent it to Nike a few weeks ago. They were having a celebration, Just Do It party, and LeBron James was there, and what better way to make a splash than send a cake to a party? And I sent it across the country to Portland and showed up in their office.
That is fantastic. Lots of parties. How often do you have resume cake show up at the door? Any? No one there?
I was so excited when she said that because I want to see a resume cake now.
I'll send you one next.
It's a cool deal.
Actually, I followed that story on the internet, and apparently the DoorDash driver or whatever also is now a mini celebrity as well.
Yeah, so
in addition to Carly.
Yeah,
okay.
she's searching
Local
for a job.
Celebrity here, people.
Fantastic. So maybe send your next proposal to the client printed on a cake. Just saying. All right. What wonderful. All right. So Carly, so you're an entrepreneur. You built a tech company. You exited a tech company. You work in this space, but you are not the developer yourself. Talk to us how do you manage that? How do you make sure you're working with the right talent? You're finding the right connections. You're recommending the right things if that's not your day-to-day.
Yeah, so as a non-technical person, it's important that I'm able to communicate and understand different points of view to technical people and all other people that I'm working with. So that was a good learning lesson and skill built over the time of building my company. And luckily, Brian Marks, my co-founder, is awesome to work with. He's our CTO. And the biggest thing is just being able to communicate the idea, making sure that it's documented, all the requirements, and making sure that everybody's on the same page and having an open communication environment. That was really important in building our company, is that everyone felt comfortable speaking their mind and speaking up when something maybe wasn't going to hit a deadline, but well before the day that it was going to happen. So I think that being a leader of a company, it's important to inspire everyone within the company to have that open communication line.
Yeah, fantastic. So I'm interested, panel. Again, I'll do a 10 scale. How important is it to know kind of the buzzwords, the acronyms, the insider language as you're talking to clients? Is that what closes the deal, or is it more on just helping them understand the value that you can provide in a different non-technical way?
Yeah, I think it's understanding the person on the other side of the table's problems and being able to speak to it, whether you know the answer and you're proficient in their language or you at least understand it. So if you're non-technical, being able to understand and listen to the technical challenges and start to equate those. And similarly on the business side, if a technical person's explaining something, seeing that they have an appreciation for some of the business challenges that are being faced goes a long way. Even if they don't have them solved, this isn't going to hit our pro forma, blah, 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 but knowing that, hey, we're trying to meet a business goal makes that technical problem that they're talking about that much more relevant contextually.
Fantastic. Anything either of you want to add?
Exactly.
Perfect.
And I would say that we try to be the best listeners we can be in order to just connect with our client, because We have some really cool human beings who are our clients. So.
Well, awesome, awesome. All right, home stretch, 2 questions to go. Question number 3, you have a lot of expertise in kind of digital marketing, storytelling, things you might think of as top of funnel as you qualify those leads and get them towards closing. Like, what is key to closing or qualifying that lead so much that the sales team, like, closing's a slam dunk?
Yeah, so it's understanding their pain points and the emotional motivator that gets them to, move to the next step. Why are they there? Is it to build something, to build a new product, to build a new app? And, are they the person that's the decision maker? Do they have a boss that is putting pressure on them? So really being able to ask the right questions and understand that emotion that goes behind something. Like, we all make decisions based on emotion. For example, like, if I was driving my car here today and I got a flat tire and I'm looking at websites of, who's going to fix my tire the quickest, and I come across this website that says, oh, we're a company that has 200 employees and a bunch of awards and all these different things. I go to the next website and it says, we'll fix your tire in 10 minutes or less. That's what I'm going to pick because that's the pain point that I'm feeling right now to get here on time today. So really understanding your consumer's pain point or whoever you're selling to and making sure that you are speaking to them in a way that matters to them and not just trying to sell yourself.
Wonderful. Sounds like some alignment to what we heard a moment ago about understanding the problems, understanding customer needs. Wonderful. All right. One day we're going to have a Riot Underground podcast about what happened on stage here tonight. That's going to be part of the biopic about Carly, right? Who's going to play you? Final question.
So if I had to have someone play me, I would say it would be Lady Gaga. So I don't know if you guys know this, but as a child, she was bullied and people told her that she would never make it as a singer. She had classmates that actually made a Facebook group, and the title was You'll Never Be Famous. And she continued to chase her dreams after everyone doubted her and stuff. So I am the type of person that's going to continue to chase my dreams and, get the dream job.
Gaga fans? Yes. Absolutely. All right. Wonderful. Okay. We hear that theme music again, a little Jeopardy, or maybe, what's the game changer of your choice? We want no whammies here, right? We want matches. Make your selections. We'll draw this pause out for dramatic effect. We don't have a commercial break like you would have on regular television, but that's good. We can finish a little faster. Everybody ready? All right. Let's go to the panel for where are you at? A, B, Bab. Got a BAB, and Carly?
I'm open to all options.
All options, wonderful. All right. So we've got, once again, acceleration with the perfect match. All three, feel free to reach out to Carly afterwards. Thanks for joining us in this this little experiment. As I said, tomorrow at the opening keynote, we'll say a few words about kind of what we learned during the course of the evening. This evening, I've got just a couple of quick closeout remarks to make, but first, let's give a round of applause for our contestants and their bravery this evening. Really exciting. So, we got one last thing that we're going to work on today as we give them a thank you, which is we're getting ready to go down and support a bunch of entrepreneurs downstairs on the mezzanine level, and I'll give you specific directions there. I've also got a code for everybody who's trying to win prizes for All Things Open. Hang with me for about 3 more slides, and I'll give you the code. I think we have a $250 Amazon gift card at stake for somebody in the audience right now. But a lot more than $250. We've got our inaugural, what we were calling Larry Bucks. And so I mentioned at the beginning I was going to talk for a few moments about Larry Stefan, who is one of the co-founders of Riot. Larry had a vision years before most people did in this region that there was entrepreneurial potential in the Triangle. For those who happen to be from this area, you may be familiar with a co-working space called American Underground over in Durham. Larry was the very first tenant in American Underground. He started a gaming incubator called Joystick Labs with some other collaborators. And he had a vision that if we could provide the kinds of resources that accelerator programs, other things that you were familiar with in Silicon Valley and in a few other hotspots around the world, had that this area could really thrive. And through Riot, we've provided a lot of services, and I'm happy with how we've grown. Unfortunately, Larry, we lost Larry a few years ago, but we wanted to memorialize him here this evening because he really laid a foundation, not just of supporting entrepreneurship, but he had a real passion for creative engagement of folks that maybe weren't traditional profile tech engineers or entrepreneurs or software developers. How do we get into underserved communities? How do we help people that are getting out of the justice system? How do we help folks in in low-income neighborhoods or folks that couldn't afford to go to college, other kinds of things? And so really the Riot mission has expanded over the years, and we've worked in more rural communities. We've worked in low-income areas. And so this evening, as a little bit of a tribute to Larry, we're excited to say, through the years, the Riot Accelerator program has worked with many, many companies. We're in our 13th cohort of this program. We're now operating in 4 cities. I can announce actually officially that in 2023, we're going to be running in Cary, North Carolina, which is a new city for us right here in the Triangle. We're already operating up in Virginia, out in Wilson, North Carolina, here in the Triangle, and we have some discussions in some other spots. But this is a free program. We don't take any ownership or equity or IP from these companies. The founders do hard work. They should own the results of that work. If you want to get involved, you can find information on riot.org. You can talk to Rachel Newberry, who I'm going to pick on in the crowd, who's here waving her hand at us. We're interested in mentors and volunteers. We're also interested in companies that have technology platforms that startups can build their companies on top of. So if you're working at a large cloud company or an analytics company or a manufacturer like DNA Group, who's our sponsor this evening, and others, we'd love to get you involved in this program. During COVID, we had a whole lot of companies that we worked with that didn't get a traditional public pitch event. One of the things that's really fun at Riot is just, we get people up on a stage at Lincoln Theater, Rock and Roll Club, at Marble's Children's Museum. We find really cool venues, Durham Bulls Stadium, other kinds of places where they can make their pitch, have their real kind of Shark Tank moment. Pandemic shut that down because nobody wants to sit online and watch a bunch of people pitch on Zoom, right? So tonight, we've got a bunch of our alumni downstairs on the mezzanine right now showing off their company, showing off their technology, and every company that's participating has got a manila envelope taped to the front of their table. And we'll pull that slide up. And the idea is everyone that goes downstairs, we're going to give you some of those Larry bucks that you saw on the screen. And the startups, what we're trying to teach them tonight is how do you leverage an event like this? There's people coming around, they're strangers, you don't know who they are, you only have a moment, it's loud, it's chaotic, people are drinking beer, who knows if they're paying attention. How do you get their attention? How do you give that elevator pitch? How do you get someone excited about your company? And they're vying for your investor dollars. And so if you like what you see something interesting, stuff that money into their envelope. We're going to count it all up tonight. Tomorrow morning, we're going to announce what startup won this evening's competition. But my call to action for you is not just to participate and engage in that, which should be a lot of fun, but also everyone in here find some way to help one of these companies. Is there an introduction that you can make for them? Is there something about what they're doing that kind of strikes a nerve that you can say, you know what? Maybe you should think about this, or I can introduce you to this person. Maybe you could be a pilot customer for them. Maybe you have a technology solution or some business expertise, something that you could lend to them or to somebody, a future person in the program. So let's form a community this evening in the same way that Todd Lewis and the amazing All Things Open team has done over the last 10 years, kind of embrace this entrepreneurship. At the same time, have a good time. At 6 o'clock, we're rolling out, I think, 3 kegs and a whole bunch of food, and it's 5:54 now. So I'm going to give a final thank you to our startups for being here. Let's go spend some money. Thank you, Riot sponsors. Thank you to the audience for being here, for participating, and for being part of this community. So thank you. All right, with that, all you need to do is when you go out this door, go to the left. There's an escalator that takes you downstairs. Then you go down one more escalator, and you'll see on the left the mezzanine level. It's the north side of the building. The entire side of the building is full of the exhibits and the food and the drink. Enjoy that. You can flexibly go back and forth between that event and the All Things Open Social. For those who are playing the online game, have the All Things Open app, Riot8 is your code to type in, and they will buzz you. They're going to buzz someone who's the winner of the $250 gift card. Thank you.